So we have an interesting shape right over here. The base is a rectangular prism, and the dimensions of that rectangular prism, it's 3 units, I guess we could say tall, 4 units wide, and then 4 units long. And then on top of that, we have what you could call a right pyramid, where the height of this right pyramid, so if you start at the center of its base right over here, and you go to the top, this height right over here is 1 unit. And this hasn't been drawn completely to scale, and kind of the perspective skews it a little bit. But our goal here is to figure out what is the length of one of these edges right over here. So either that one or this one right over here. What is that length? And we will call that x. And so I encourage you to pause this video and try to think about it on your own. Remember, this is a right pyramid. So what that tells us is that this red line that's a 1 unit long, it is perpendicular to this entire plane. It's perpendicular to the top of the rectangular prism. So with that in mind, I encourage you to pause the video and see if you can figure it out. And I will give you a hint. You will have to use the Pythagorean theorem maybe more than once. All right. So I'm assuming you've at least given it a shot. So let's work through it together. So the key here is to realize, well, okay, this point, this base right over here, this point right over here, it's halfway in this direction and halfway in this direction. So we can figure out, well, this entire length right over here is length 4. So halfway, this is going to be, I'll write it with perspective, that's going to be 2, and that's going to be 2, just like that. And then the other thing we can figure out what this length is going to be, because once again it's halfway in that direction. So if this whole thing is 2, and we see it right over here, this is a rectangular prism, so this length is going to be the same thing as this length. So if this whole thing is 2, then each of these, this is going to be 1, and this is going to be 1 right over there. Well, how does that help us? Well, using that information, we should be able to figure out this length. Actually, I'll keep it in this color because this color is easy to see. We should be able to figure out this length. Well, why is this length interesting? Well, if we know that length forms a right triangle. That length and the 1 are the 2 non-hypotenuse sides of a right triangle, and then the x would be the hypotenuse. So we could just apply the Pythagorean theorem. So if we can figure out this, we can figure out x. So let's do one step at a time. How do we figure out, I don't know, let me call this length. How do we figure out length A? Well, let's just take it out and look at it in 2 dimensions. So if we look at it in 2 dimensions, it would look something like this. So that's our length A. We know that this length is half of this side right over here, so that's going to be 1. And actually, let me do it at the same colors. So this right over here is the same thing as this right over here, and it is going to be of length 1. And then this right over here is going to be the same as this right over here, which is going to be of length 2. And so we can just use the Pythagorean theorem here. We know that the hypotenuse squared is going to be equal to 1 squared plus 2 squared. 1 squared plus 2 squared, which of course is equal to 1 plus 4, which is equal to 5. So we could write let me do this in the magenta color. We can write a squared is equal to 5, or we could say that a is equal to the principal root of 5. So this length right over here is the square root of 5, the principal root of 5. And now we can use that information to solve for x. And let's take this right triangle. And it takes a little bit of visualization practice to visualize it, right? But notice this is a right triangle. This height right here of length 1 is perpendicular to this entire plane. So let's see if I can draw it. So we have this side is the square root of 5. And then we have a height. Let me do it. It looks like it's in a, well, let's say we're talking about this height right over here. This height right over here is length 1. So I'll draw that. That is of length 1. And we are trying to figure out x. We are trying to figure out x in orange. So we're trying to figure out this x. And once again, we know this is a right triangle. This is a right triangle, so we can apply the Pythagorean theorem again. So we will have x squared is equal to 1 squared, which is just, I'll just write it, 1 squared plus square root of 5 squared plus square root of 5 squared. Well, that gets us x squared is equal to 1 plus 5, right? Square root of 5 squared is just 5. So 1 plus 5 is equal to 6. So we get x is equal to the square root of 6. And we're done. We figured out the length of this side right over here.